First of all, I want to thank the Circle Foundation for the kind invitation and for taking up this critical issue in a timely manner. I know the issue has been on our agenda, on our minds for quite some time. A lot of tension has been building up, and of course, we follow these developments with a lot of concern in Turkey as well, because there's a lot at stake here. But first of all, let me just state very clearly that we do not want to see any kind of military action, confrontation, or war in Ukraine or between Russia and Ukraine, and we fully support Ukraine's territorial integrity and political sovereignty, as well as the social cohesion of the Ukrainian people. That is, all Ukrainian citizens living, in peace as equal citizens in Ukraine. We do not want to see any kind of new war. We've had enough of them in Syria, in Iraq. I mean, in other parts of the world. So we are telling both sides, both the Ukrainians and the Russians, to use restraint, to refrain from any kind of military engagement. I know there has been a build-up, as Ms. Olga has pointed out over the last couple of months. But let me just turn to the larger question here, which is why things have come to this point now, and what is at stake as far as the Russia-NATO line of communication is concerned, or relations between Russia and the Western alliance in general. I think, of course, in one respect, this is about Ukraine, what may or may not happen in Ukraine along the Ukrainian-Russian border. And of course, we have to take Ukraine's security concerns very seriously. And we do not want to see, as I said, any kind of war, military confrontation or action on the ground by Russia or by any other actors there. But on the other hand, if you look at it from another point of view, this is not simply about Ukraine. This is about the larger geopolitical framework in which the last 30 years of geopolitical realities since the end of the Cold War have taken different forms and shapes. In a sense, there is an attempt, at least by the Russian side, to have some kind of a reckoning with the last 30 years, what happened, what changed in terms of geopolitical parameters, and how Russia feels in all of this. Of course, the Ukrainians also have paid a price for this by losing Crimea, the illegal annexation of Crimea, which we all have denounced and not accepted. But there have been a number of other developments in the Caucasus, in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in other parts of the world as well. So the question is how far this may go, what kind of demands are out there to redefine or to maintain the geopolitical parameters of the current state of affairs in and around, say, Russia, Ukraine, NATO security perspective. First of all, I think a real, genuine, a comprehensive dialogue between Russia and NATO and the Western alliance in general, in a larger context, I believe is just beginning. We are just at the beginning of a new type of negotiation or conversation, if you like. A serious one, a genuine one, not one between, say, Russia and a certain number of countries, but between Russia and the Western allies, particularly, of course, NATO, but also there are other non-NATO members in Europe who are rightly concerned about what's happening there. So I think we are at the very beginning of this new process. So we really have to take kind of a longer view of what may happen, say, this year or the next couple of years. As I said, we all have to do everything we can in our capacity to prevent any kind of war, any kind of military action. But even if we say avoid this for the time being, I think the tensions will remain. Maybe there will be some other types of tensions, threat perceptions, moves on the ground, not necessarily in the form of traditional warfare, but in some other way. So we have to take that into account. Another point I think to remember is that it's really rather counterproductive that this dialogue between Russia and the Western alliance is taking place under the pressure of the Ukrainian issue right now. This should have, of course, started a long time ago. Of course, we know why the dialogue stopped at the NATO-Russia Council. It was because of the annexation of Crimea in 2014. And since then, the Council has not met. I mean, met once or twice in 2016, 17, very briefly. It did not really produce the kind of deep engagement, comprehensive dialogue that it was designed to continue. So we, I think, have to take this into account and realize that we are all engaged now in this new phase of Russia Western relations. Now, what are the larger geopolitical issues? First of all, I think we all agree that there has been a lack of global equilibrium, geopolitically speaking, over the last 30 years or so. The end of the Cold War was the end of something, but we didn't know whether it was the beginning of a new era, or it was like stopping a war. But then what do you do after you stop the war, after you stop the Cold War? What was instituted in its place has remained a big question, of course, not just, you know, for the sake of theoretical interest, but in terms of conducting international politics. It's been a big issue. The global order has kind of swung between one pole, two poles, multipolar system, the U.S.-Russia rivalry, or now China joining the process, and, you know, EU trying to find a geopolitical and strategic position for itself. Yeah, consider all of these things. We can, I think, safely say that the global order, in whatever shape it has taken over the last 30 years, has not produced the kind of geopolitical equilibrium that will bring a degree of stability, predictability, and transparency to what's happening on a global scale. There are, of course, competing security threat perceptions playing out at the moment. If you listen to the Russians, they are concerned that the West is coming at them. NATO or American soldiers are at their door. They are plotting things in their backyard, etc. And if you listen to the Western circles, then they say Russia has been a destabilizing force. It's been a spoiler, doing this, doing that here and there, etc. But at the end of the day, what is really coming out of Western capitals about Russia, and what is really coming out of Moscow and other Russian circles about the West, about NATO, etc., I think they've been have been rather unhelpful, counterproductive in terms of continuing this dialogue and coming to terms with the realities on the ground. That is a kind of a global equilibrium where the Western alliance, NATO, Russia, China, and other big players feel safe enough to engage each other without going into war. Number of other elements, of course, have triggered this process. What happened in Georgia, for example, in 2008 and 9, if you remember, if you go back there was that Russian reaction at that time too, that the West was moving too much into Russian hinterland. And the reaction was the Georgian-Russian war, and we all know the consequences. And then there was the Syrian war, which accelerated after 2012-13. There was a kind of international coalition consensus led mostly by Western powers, United States, European countries, Turkey, and others at that time, to bring an end to the bloodshed in Syria. Red lines were crossed. I don't want to repeat what happened. I mean, we all know that history. But the result was that Russia moved in with Iran, seeing that the so-called Friends of Syria group, led mostly by Western countries, was not going to do what it will take on the ground to change the equilibrium in the war in Syria. And then we saw what happened in Libya, in other parts of the world also, where Russians have been active, present, militarily, politically, and other ways. Therefore, I think we have to look at this larger picture here and realize that a serious, genuine, comprehensive engagement dialogue is more urgent now than ever. And of course, we have to speak to the Russians very clearly and openly about Ukraine's territorial integrity, political stability, and maintaining it, why it will be in Russia's interest as well, why a confrontation with NATO, with the Western Alliance, and the rest of the world will not bring them any benefits. So in that regard, I think it is important to underline the significance of refraining from maximalist, expansionist approaches and demands, and try to find some kind of a modus vivendi through genuine dialogue, comprehensive talks, and do it with wisdom and patience. I think if we expect some quick results, then we will fail in this process. There are no quick fixes for this kind of large, long-term geopolitical issues, because, as I said, it is, in one sense, yes, it is about Ukraine, but in another sense, it's something, much larger, much bigger at stake here. As Turkey, we've been talking to both the Russians and the Ukrainians. President Erdogan has been speaking to both President Putin and President Zelensky. In fact, he even invited both of them to come to Turkey if they want to, have a meeting there, sort out their issues and differences, and Turkey remains available for any role that it can play to lower tensions between Russia and Ukraine. And we do this as Turkey as a friendly country to both Russia and Ukraine, but also as a NATO ally. In fact, in the next couple of weeks, President Erdogan will be traveling to Ukraine to hold talks with President Zelensky there, but also we will remain in close contact with the Russians to avoid any kind of military action whose consequences, of course, will be great and irreversible. So we all have to do whatever we can to avoid that kind of a situation. So let me just stop here with this few remarks and to use the time in an economic way, also an effective way. Thank you for your attention.